happening right now. President Donald Trump hosting leaders of several African nations there at the White House. He's talking trade and U.S. aid to Africa.
Some African leaders, it seems, have forgotten who they are and who they're meant to serve. Why do we say that? Right now, the President of the United States is hosting 5 West African leaders in Washington, D.C. The official line from the White House is all about trade, development, partnerships. But beneath the handshakes and smiles, a different reality is playing out. It wasn't so long ago that President Trump made it painfully clear. To him, African nations were irrelevant. He dismissed them publicly, casting a shadow over any talk of genuine partnership. And yet, here we are, watching African presidents sit across the table, nodding politely, eager for attention. Some would say they look less like heads of sovereign nations and more like servants hoping for a master's favor. It's a sight that's both heartbreaking and enraging. So what exactly is wrong with Africa's leadership? Is there any real hope for the continent if this is the caliber of its leaders? And why, time after time, do African leaders keep bending over backward to please the West? These are the questions we need to ask, because Africa's future might just depend on the answers. Let's find out. On July 9th, the President of the United States kicked off a 3-day summit in Washington, D.C., a gathering that the White House was quick to brand as an incredible commercial opportunity. Seated at the table were the leaders of 5 African nations: Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mauritania, and Senegal. On paper, these countries may seem small, modest populations, modest economies, especially compared to the sheer scale of the United States. But they possess something America wants, something it desperately needs: vast reserves of natural resources, oil, minerals, precious metals, the kind of wealth hidden beneath the earth that can shape global power. The summit's first day was a spectacle, a televised lunch at the White House with Trump presiding over his African guests. For anyone watching, the scene was hard to stomach. Trump, as usual, played his part, confident, towering, radiating an air of superiority. But that wasn't the most shocking part. What was truly cringeworthy was how the African leaders carried themselves around him. Instead of standing tall as presidents of sovereign nations, they seemed deferential, almost subservient. It was as though they hadn't come as equals to negotiate, but as vassals, paying tribute to an emperor on his throne. And for anyone who believes in the dignity of African leadership, it was a scene that was both painful and infuriating to watch. While the United States might be the world's superpower, let's get one thing straight. None of these African nations are insignificant. Each of them holds strategic weight, immense resources, and people with a voice that matters on the global stage. But here's the tragedy. While the West carries itself with a towering superiority complex, some African leaders seem burdened by something just as damaging: a deep-seated inferiority complex. It's pathetic to watch. For reasons hard to fully understand, or perhaps all too easy to understand, these leaders believe they must pander to Washington's every whim. And that belief was on full display during the summit's first day. Throughout the meeting, African presidents showered Trump with praise, seemingly eager to win favor and encourage American investment. But the flattery reached a new level when Mauritania's president, Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, spoke up. Seated diagonally across the long wooden table from Trump, Ghazouani leaned forward, his voice respectful, almost reverent. "In the short time you've been back in office, the last few months, you came to the rescue for peace. You rushed to Africa to resolve a long-standing problem," he continued, referencing the peace deal between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda that the White House had brokered. And the praise didn't stop there. One by one, the other African leaders echoed Ghazouani's words. Some went as far as to suggest Trump should be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. For many watching, it was a bitter pill to swallow, a stark reminder of how, even in the halls of diplomacy, old power dynamics linger, and dignity can be all too easily surrendered for the hope of Western approval. Can you even believe this? It's as if these leaders are suffering from a case of selective amnesia. Since Trump returned to office in January, nearly every move he's made has sent a crystal-clear message. Africa simply doesn't matter to him. He's slashed aid to the continent, a decision that, strangely enough, Some even applaud for forcing African nations to become more self-reliant. But that's hardly the end of it. Trump has made it brutally clear that Africans are not welcome in the United States. No region has been hit harder by his immigration and visa restrictions than Africa, and there's no sign he plans to stop anytime soon. On top of that, he's slapped African nations with punishing tariffs, economic blows that have already started to ripple through local economies. But somehow, these 5 African leaders seem to have conveniently forgotten all of this. Instead, they gathered in Washington and showered Trump with praise over a so-called peace deal that, let's be honest, is still hanging by a thread. Because despite that deal, the fighting hasn't stopped. And if anyone's benefiting so far, it's the United States, not Africa. Yet there they were, these leaders, eager to flatter Trump, some even suggesting he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. The president of Senegal, Diomaye Faye, took it to another level. He not only praised Trump's diplomatic moves, but also complimented his golf skills. And then, in a moment that left many stunned, he invited Trump to come build a golf course in Senegal. It's enough to make you wonder, where is the pride? Where is the dignity? And how long will Africa's future be shaped by leaders willing to trade respect for applause from the West? Trump was practically glowing under the flood of praise from the African leaders. With a grin, he leaned forward and said, "Thank you very much. Very nice. Thank you. I didn't know I'd be treated this nicely. This is great." And then, true to form, he lavished his own kind of compliments in return. He told the leaders they came from very vibrant places with very valuable land, great minerals, great oil deposits, and wonderful people. But let's not kid ourselves. When Trump talks about Africa, what he's really talking about is the land, the minerals, and the oil. The riches buried beneath African soil. That's where his interest lies. The people, they're barely an afterthought. Then came a moment that was downright cringeworthy. Trump turned to Liberian President Joseph Boakai and complimented him on his English-speaking skills. Think about that for a second. The leader of a sovereign African nation being praised for speaking English, as though he were a student earning a gold star from a teacher. But the real shocker came from Boakai himself. Looking straight at Trump, the Liberian president declared, "Liberia is a longtime friend of the United States, and we believe in your policy of making America great again." Let's hit pause right there, because we all know exactly what Trump's Make America Great Again policy has meant for Africa. Tariffs, restrictions, disdain. And Liberia hasn't been spared. Trump hit the country with a 10% tariff that's already causing economic pain. And yet, while world leaders from places like Canada and China have boldly condemned Trump's trade policies and even retaliated, the president of Liberia is sitting in Washington, applauding Trump for the very policies that are hurting his own country. Isn't that just plain dumb? What exactly was the Liberian president thinking? Or perhaps the real question is, how long will African leaders keep applauding those who stand in the way of their continent's progress? You see, of all the nations in Africa, few have felt the sting of Trump's policies as deeply as Liberia. This is a country with a unique and painful history. Founded in the 19th century by freed slaves from the United States, Liberia has long looked to America as both a partner and a symbol of hope. But hope has been in short supply. A brutal 14-year civil war left Liberia shattered. Just as it was struggling to rebuild, the country was struck by the devastating Ebola epidemic a decade ago. Hospitals overflowed, communities were torn apart, and Liberia's fragile health system was pushed to the brink. Through it all, U.S. aid was a lifeline. In fact, nearly half, 48%, of Liberia's health budget once depended on American funding. But then came Trump's cuts. Suddenly, the money dried up. Doctors, medicine, crucial health programs, gone or scaled back. The consequences have been devastating. So maybe, in that context, we begin to understand why the Liberian president felt he had no choice but to bow low before Trump. Desperate times breed desperate measures. According to reports, Liberia is now weighing a grim proposal from the U.S. Accept people deported from America, including criminals, and in return, get financial assistance. Isn't that utterly pathetic? A nation forced to trade its dignity and security for scraps of aid. And the question we're left with is this: How long will African nations have to keep paying this price just to survive? Anyway, the reason behind the Liberian president's trip to Washington was clear. He was there to negotiate, to plead for U.S. investment in his country, and to discuss that controversial proposal, the idea that Liberia might accept deportees from America, criminals included, in exchange for financial aid. It was in the middle of these talks that President Trump made an unusual discovery. Despite Liberia's history, colonized by America, founded by freed U.S. slaves, Trump seemed genuinely shocked that the Liberian president could speak fluent English. "Such good English," Trump exclaimed. "Where did you learn to speak so beautifully?" Just think about that for a moment. This is the President of the United States speaking to the head of a nation with deep ties to America, a country whose official language has been English for generations. Isn't this exactly the kind of basic fact a world leader should already know? But Trump didn't. And do you know why? It's because he simply doesn't regard African countries as worth knowing about. To him, they're insignificant, places with nothing to offer beyond oil, minerals, and land. He couldn't be bothered to do any research because in his eyes, Africa remains a blank space on the map. And sadly, he's not alone in that ignorance. It's the same way many U.S. citizens know almost nothing about Africa or other regions, beyond the narrow stories their media chooses to tell them. And until that mindset changes, these encounters between African leaders and American presidents may keep playing out like awkward, one-sided performances. Interestingly, the Liberian president didn't appear offended at all by Trump's question. Instead, he simply chuckled, as though it were just harmless curiosity. But Trump, still looking confused, pressed on and asked, "In Liberia?" To which the Liberian president replied, "Yes, sir."
Well, thank you. It's such good English, such beautiful. Where did you learn to speak so beautifully? Where were you educated? Where?
Yes, sir.
In Liberia.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's very interesting.
And that's where it gets hard to watch. Because why would the president of a sovereign nation respond with a "yes, sir" to another president as though he were a subordinate? Was it simple respect? Or was it that same old inferiority complex rearing its head yet again? Either way, the situation felt downright pathetic. But while some African leaders seemed eager to please, there were others who showed more spine. Gabon's president, Oligui Nguema, spoke with a different kind of conviction. He told Trump that Gabon was open to investment and made it clear his country wants to see its raw minerals processed locally, rather than just extracted and shipped abroad. We are not poor countries. We are rich countries when it comes to raw materials. But we need partners to support us and help us develop those resources with win-win partnerships, Nguema declared. At least his words carried a sense of pride and self-respect. And then he added something even more striking. "You are welcome to come and invest. Otherwise, other countries might come instead of you." It was subtle, but powerful. A quiet warning that Africa has options and that it won't wait forever for America to see its worth. In that moment, President Nguema proved he had more backbone than many of his peers. And maybe that's exactly the kind of leadership Africa needs right now. Meanwhile, Senegal's president, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, took his turn at the table, eager to pitch his country as a land of opportunity. He spoke of tourism, mentioning the potential for building a golf course, and floated an ambitious vision, a tech city in Dakar with sweeping views of the sea. "I would like to invite American investors to take part in this," he said, his tone hopeful, almost earnest. Then there was the president of Guinea-Bissau, Umaro Sissoco Embalo, who arrived in Washington with his own goals. He's reportedly eager for the United States to reopen its embassy in Bissau, which has remained shuttered ever since the army mutinied back in 1998. And President Embalo seemed downright proud to have received the White House invitation at all. It's striking when you consider that not long ago, Guinea-Bissau was branded a narco state by the U.S. and the UN, a notorious transit hub for cocaine moving from Latin America to Europe and North America. Standing at the airport before boarding his flight to Washington, Embalo told reporters, "Guinea-Bissau has now emerged from a state of disorder to become a real state. The Americans do not invite just any state to their country, only a well-structured state." Imagine that. An African president beaming with pride simply because he'd been invited to visit the United States. If that's not a textbook case of an inferiority complex, what is? And it begs the question, when will African leaders finally develop the backbone to see themselves and their nations as equals on the world stage, rather than guests hoping for approval? For once, the African Union got something right. Officials from the AU have publicly questioned how Africa is supposed to deepen trade ties with the United States when Washington continues to impose what they described as abusive tariff proposals and visa restrictions that hit African travelers the hardest. And that is the question those 5 African leaders in Washington seemed all too eager to forget. Because here's the truth, these leaders are clearly lacking national pride. If they had any real sense of dignity or vision, they would have put some distance between themselves and the United States and the broader West. But instead, they're part of a crop of African leaders who've convinced themselves that the only way to succeed is to stay close to Western powers, no matter the cost. Yet a simple moment of common sense should have made them stop and ask one crucial question. What has Africa actually gained from the United States and the West after decades of so-called partnerships? If these leaders dared to think critically, they'd arrive at the same conclusion many others already have. The answer is absolutely nothing. Over all these years, it's the United States and the West who've been taking from Africa again and again. Raw resources, cheap labor, strategic advantages. Meanwhile, promises of true partnership remain little more than words. It's beyond pathetic that so many African leaders can't, or won't, see past the small amounts of cash and aid dangled in front of them. Because while they chase crumbs from foreign tables, the true wealth and potential of Africa keeps slipping away. But perhaps, just perhaps, these African leaders believe that Trump's model of partnership might be different. After all, in line with his Make America Great Again agenda, Trump has scrapped the old, charity-driven foreign aid approach. For decades, previous U.S. administrations handed out aid to African countries, sometimes generously, but always with strings attached, like access to precious minerals. But Trump's team insists they're moving away from that. Instead, they claim they want partnerships only with nations that show both the ability and willingness to help themselves. According to one former diplomat, Trump's foreign policy playbook is pure transactionalism, the same style he used with Ukraine's wartime leader, Volodymyr Zelensky. Pure trade. It's give and take, win and win. We saw it with Ukraine. You sign the agreement on minerals, and you'll have us on your side. Otherwise, you forget everything, Mr. Diagni explained. But that raises a burning question. What does it really mean to have the United States on your side? Because let's not forget, Trump has slapped harsh tariffs even on traditional U.S. allies like Canada earlier this year. So what exactly would African countries gain after signing away their mineral wealth to America? Would they see real growth and development, jobs created, industries built, communities lifted out of poverty? Or would they simply earn the hollow title of being U.S. allies, while their resources disappear overseas and their people remain stuck in the same struggles? That's the uncomfortable truth African leaders should be asking, because in this new era of pure trade, the stakes couldn't be higher. It's crystal clear what the United States stands to gain from Africa. Access. Access to the continent's vast reserves of lucrative minerals, and the chance to outmaneuver rivals like China and Russia in the race for influence across Africa. Because here's the reality. Africa isn't just important, it's crucial to the future. The world is standing on the brink of the fourth industrial revolution, sometimes called the Great Reset. This new era will define global economic trends for decades to come, fueled by advanced technologies like electric vehicles, AI, green energy, and high-tech manufacturing. And every single one of these innovations depends on critical minerals. Minerals that, in large part, lie beneath African soil. So, let's spell it out. Any country that secures reliable, easy access to Africa's critical minerals holds the keys to global leadership in the fourth industrial revolution. That's why suddenly everyone, Western and non-Western nations alike, is scrambling to deepen ties with the continent. And it's also why, despite the fact that Trump has little personal regard for Africa, he's still forced to court African leaders. Reports say he's even planning a major summit with all African heads of state this coming September. because the stakes are too high to ignore. And it's not just America. Other Western nations are lining up as well, each hoping to stake their claim and secure a piece of Africa's future. The question now is whether African leaders will finally recognize the power they hold or continue to trade away their resources for promises that rarely materialize. Honestly, it's starting to feel like history repeating itself, like the Berlin Conference all over again. Only this time, the carve-up of Africa isn't happening with maps and boundary lines drawn in European palaces. Now, it's cloaked in the language of partnership. Colonization may be banned, but make no mistake, the world's powers still want their piece of Africa, and they've found a new way to get it, entering into so-called partnerships that more often than not benefit them far more than they benefit the continent itself. And the saddest part, many African leaders seem either too naive or not patriotic enough to see through it. They keep signing these agreements, offering up Africa's wealth for the promise of loans, aid, or fleeting diplomatic applause. When will African leaders finally learn? One of the most irritating things about these endless summits between foreign countries and Africa is where they're held. Always abroad. The U.S. Africa Summit held in Washington, the Italy Africa Summit held in Rome, the South Korea Africa Summit held in Seoul. And the moment those invitations land on their desks, African leaders drop everything. They pack their bags and rush off, eager to sit and listen, like school children, while one foreign leader holds court. President William Ruto summed it up perfectly. He pointed out how each African leader is given just 15 minutes to speak, and then, as though it's some class photo, they're all gathered together to smile for pictures with a single head of state. What a shame. Because here's the truth. Africa is the one holding the cards. Africa has what the world needs. Critical minerals, vast resources, strategic importance. In fact, these summits are little more than well-staged events designed to woo African leaders into signing away their resources in exchange for loans or financial aid. Instead of sending every single African president to sit in someone else's capital, why not let the African Union handle these talks? Send representatives. Speak with one voice. Negotiate as a bloc. Because until that happens, Africa risks being played, again and again, by the same old script.